When a man in a worn-out jacket and dusty boots walked into one of the most expensive stores on Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills, nobody paid attention to him. He wasn't loud, he wasn't rude, he didn't demand anything from anyone. He just walked in quietly, like a regular person running a regular errand on a regular Thursday morning. But this was no regular person. He had a very important reason for being there. He needed to find the perfect gift for his best friend, a man who had spent 23 years doing one of the hardest jobs in Hollywood, breaking bones, tearing ligaments, showing up every single day without anyone ever putting his name in lights or pointing a camera in his direction. A man who was now retiring. A man who deserved something that said, "I see you. I always have." So he walked into this beautiful, glittering store full of watches that cost more than most people make in a year, and he was ready to spend whatever it took. But the people who worked there took one look at his old boots and his borrowed gray jacket, and they looked away. Nobody walked over to help him. Nobody said welcome. Nobody even turned around when he said excuse me. He waited, and waited, and waited some more. 43 minutes. Standing in one of the most famous shopping streets in the entire world, being treated like he didn't belong there, like he wasn't worth the time it would take to walk across a carpet and ask him what he needed. And he just sat down on a bench and waited quietly, without getting angry, without making a scene, without pulling out his phone to call someone powerful, who could change the energy in that room in about 4 seconds flat. Because that is exactly the kind of man he is. What nobody in that store knew, not the young woman pretending to arrange a display she had already arranged, not the other associate helping someone in a cream blazer, not anyone, was who was sitting on that bench. What they didn't know was what he was carrying that morning, not just in the bag he was planning to walk out with, but inside. The phone call he had received that morning, the words from his best friend's wife that had changed the weight of everything. And what nobody could have predicted was what would happen when the store manager finally walked through that frosted glass door, took one look at the man on the bench, and felt something stop her in her tracks. Not because of his jacket, not because of his boots, but because of something she saw on his wrist, something small and blue and almost worn through, that told her more about who this man really was than any famous face or famous name ever could. What happened next in that store changed everything. For the manager, for the staff, for the man buying the watch, and for the friend the watch was meant for, who was sitting at home that very morning, scared about something he hadn't told anyone yet. Stay with us for the whole story, because the part that will stay with you longest is not the humiliation at the beginning. It's what this man did at the end, what he said about the people who ignored him, what he whispered when no one was listening, and what 4 words he had engraved on the back of that watch that made a grown woman who hadn't cried at work in 11 years feel her eyes fill with tears. You need to see how this ends. The alarm didn't go off because there was no alarm. Keanu Reeves woke up the way he wakes up most mornings, on his own, in the quiet, before the city outside had fully decided to be loud. It was March 14th, 2019. A Thursday. The kind of Thursday that looks identical to every other Thursday from the outside. The kind of day that history doesn't bother to mark until something happens inside it that turns out to matter. His house in the Hollywood Hills was not what most people imagine when they imagine a movie star's house. There were no infinity pools photographed for magazines. No personal chef moving through a kitchen the size of a basketball court. The home was large enough to be comfortable and modest enough to be real. Bookshelves that were actually used, a guitar in the corner that was actually played, a kitchen where dishes sat in the drying rack because he washed them himself. People who had visited described it the same way, always surprised by the same thing. It felt lived in. It felt like someone actually stayed there. He sat on the edge of his bed for a moment in the early morning light. Outside the window, Los Angeles was doing what Los Angeles always does in March. pretending it might rain, and then deciding not to. The sky was the color of old pewter, soft and non-committal, and the hills were green in the way they only get green for about 6 weeks a year before the summer burns everything back to gold. Keanu stood up. He moved through his morning without ceremony. He made his own coffee. Black, nothing added, in a machine that was neither expensive nor new. He drank it standing at the kitchen counter looking out at the garden, where 2 birds were conducting some urgent argument in a tree he had never learned the name of. He watched them until they worked it out and flew away. Then he washed his mug and set it on the rack. He pulled on clothes without much deliberation. Dark jeans, worn soft from washing. Black boots that had been resoled twice because he liked them and saw no reason to replace something that still worked. A gray jacket. This is a true detail, the kind of small truth that ends up meaning something. That belonged, technically, to his friend David Leitch, the director, who had left it at his house during a dinner 2 winters ago. Keanu had texted him about it. David had told him to keep it. He hadn't. He'd just kept meaning to return it, and kept forgetting. So now it lived on a hook by the door, and he wore it when he wasn't thinking about what he was wearing, which was most of the time. He had not shaved in 4 days. His hair was tied back loosely, the silver at his temples catching the morning light. He looked 54 years old, which he was, and he looked like a man who had been through a significant amount of life, which he had. He did not look like someone who had just finished filming John Wick, Chapter 3, Parabellum, which had wrapped principal photography only weeks before. He did not look like a man whose global box office had crossed $1 billion. He did not look like someone whose face was, at that precise moment, appearing on promotional materials in 47 countries. He looked like a man who fixes things. A man who does his own grocery runs and pumps his own gas and sits in the middle seat on commercial flights, without complaint, because he genuinely does not think he deserves the window more than anyone else. This is not an act. Dozens of people have filmed it by accident. Caught him on a subway car in New York, on a bus in London, sitting on a curb in Toronto sharing a sandwich with a stranger who did not know who he was. The videos always go the same way. Shock, warmth, the unmistakable quality of someone encountering a famous person who has made no room for their own fame. That morning, standing in his kitchen with his clean mug on the rack and his borrowed jacket on his back, Keanu had one thing on his mind. A watch. Not just any watch. The right watch. A specific one he had been thinking about for 2 weeks, ever since he had decided that Marcus Hale's retirement deserved something that would last longer than a dinner or a speech. Marcus Hale was not a household name. He was the kind of man whose name rolls through end credits at a speed designed to prevent reading, buried in a column of identical job titles that audiences scroll past on their way to the blooper reel. But on set, everyone knew Marcus. Stunt coordinator, 23 years in the industry. The man who stood where the cameras weren't pointing and made sure that the things that looked impossible were done safely, precisely, by people who trusted him with their bodies. He had broken his collarbone the first time in 1998, on a production outside of Vancouver. The second time was 2003, on a highway chase sequence that went slightly wrong in the way things on film sets go slightly wrong. Quickly, without warning, and with no one at fault. He had torn the ligaments in his left knee on a film shot in Prague in 2011, and had flown home in a brace, and been back on set in 4 weeks, because that was simply who Marcus was. He did not make his injuries into stories. He healed and he came back and he did the work. He and Keanu had met in the mid-90s. Their friendship was the quiet kind, not flashy, not documented in the tabloids, not performed for any audience. The kind that exists in long phone calls, and showing up at the right moment, and knowing when to talk, and when to just be in the room. Marcus had worked on 2 of Keanu's productions. On set they were professional. Offset, they were simply two men who had known each other long enough to have run out of the need to impress each other, which is the most comfortable state two people can reach. Marcus was retiring at the end of the month. There was a gathering planned, small, in Silver Lake, the kind of party that is actually about the person and not about the party. And Keanu had decided, without telling anyone and without asking for input, that he wanted to give Marcus a watch, a Patek Philippe Calatrava, if he could find the right one. He had done the research. He knew what he was looking for. He picked up his keys from the bowl by the door, a ceramic bowl that had a small chip in the rim and that he had never replaced because it still held keys, and he walked out to his car. A black Porsche, 6 years old, the kind of car that is expensive enough to be a Porsche and dusty enough to look like it belongs to someone who drives it to actual places, rather than showing it off. He pulled out of the driveway at 10:19 in the morning. He took Sunset to Santa Monica Boulevard and drove toward Beverly Hills in the mid-morning traffic, radio off, windows slightly down. He was not in a hurry. He had nowhere else to be. John Wick 3 was in post-production. He had a read-through for a different project the following week, but today was open. And a day that is genuinely open is something Keanu Reeves treats with the same care most people treat important appointments. He fills it deliberately, with something that matters. Today, it was the watch. Today, it was finding the right way to say to Marcus Hale, "You spent 23 years doing work that no one photographed, and taking damage that no one compensated you enough for, and you showed up every time without being asked twice. And I see that. I have always seen that. And I want you to carry something on your wrist for the rest of your life that knows it too." He parked on a side street 2 blocks from Rodeo Drive. He did not use a parking structure. He circled twice and found a meter, fed it coins from the cup holder, and walked the rest of the way on foot, hands in the pockets of David Leitch's gray jacket, boots quiet on the Beverly Hills pavement. He pushed open the door of Arlington and Cole at 10:47 in the morning. The air inside was different from the air outside. Cooler, stiller. It smelled of something neutral and expensive, the kind of scent that is specifically chosen to say nothing and therefore says, wealth. The carpet was deep and the color of slate. The display cases ran along both walls, lit from below so the watches inside glowed, as though the light were coming from inside them. A chandelier the size of a dining table hung overhead without being ostentatious, which took considerable engineering. The silence was the deliberate kind, manicured and maintained. It was the kind of silence that is designed, whether consciously or not, to separate the people who belong from the people who don't. Keanu stood just inside the door for a moment and looked around. Near the entrance, behind a low display case, a young woman looked up from what she was doing. She looked at the gray jacket. She looked at the worn boots. She looked at the 4 days of unshaved jaw and the hair tied back without attention. She looked at his face. She did not recognize it. She looked back down. Keanu waited for a moment, patient, unhurried, a man who has stood in far colder rooms than this. He looked at the cases along the wall. He was not embarrassed yet. He was just a man in a borrowed jacket, looking for something beautiful to give to someone who deserved it. He had no idea what the next 43 minutes would feel like. But he walked toward the first display case, and he let the door close behind him, and the soft, expensive silence folded back into place around him, like it had never been broken at all. The first display case held 6 watches on individual velvet mounts, each one angled slightly toward the viewer, the way faces turn toward light. Keanu moved to it slowly, without urgency, the way he moves through most spaces, without announcing himself, without the particular energy that famous people sometimes carry, the invisible force field of expectation that clears rooms and parts crowds. He had spent decades learning to move like a civilian. He was good at it. Good enough that he could stand in the middle of one of the most famous shopping streets in the world, in a store that sold objects worth more than most people's cars, and register as nobody in particular. He leaned down over the case. Inside, resting on charcoal velvet under carefully calibrated lighting, lay the watches. Each one its own small argument for a certain kind of beauty. The beauty of precision, of craftsmanship, applied to the measurement of something as abstract and unstoppable as time. There was a Rolex Datejust in white gold, clean and authoritative. A Jaeger LeCoultre Reverso, its rectangular face suggesting old European libraries and leather chairs. And there, at the far left end of the case, a Patek Philippe Calatrava, in rose gold with a cream dial and a slim profile that did not shout or demand. It simply existed, at a level of quality that required no announcement. Keanu looked at it for a long time. This was the one. He had known it would be when he'd seen it described online. And he knew it now looking at the real thing. The Calatrava was a watch for a man who understood that the quietest things are often the most serious. Marcus Hale had never once raised his voice on a film set. He had never needed to. The people who worked under him listened because he had earned it. Through knowledge, through steadiness, through 23 years of showing up and knowing exactly what he was doing. The Calatrava was that, in metal and glass. It was authority without noise. Keanu straightened up. The young woman, Brianna Loft, though he didn't know her name, was standing at her station perhaps 8 feet away. Her back was partially turned. She was doing something with a tray of display pieces, making small adjustments that the display did not actually need. Her posture was the posture of someone who is performing busyness. There is a specific quality to performed busyness, a quality of the shoulders, a deliberateness to the hands, that is different from real busyness. And most people learn to recognize it in childhood when they're watching a parent pretend not to hear a question. Keanu recognized it. He said, "Excuse me." His voice in person is something people remark on when they meet him. Low and unhurried, carrying the particular quality of a man who has trained his instrument, not for the purposes of projection or performance, but simply because he has spent 35 years listening to himself speak on screen and has made quiet peace with the voice he has. It is a voice that does not need to be raised to be heard. In the quiet interior of Arlington and Cole, it was easily loud enough. Brianna heard it. There was no question. The store was, at that moment, occupied by 3 customers. The woman in the cream blazer at the far end with Derek Soames, an older man in a suit who was inspecting cufflinks near the door, and Keanu. The room was quiet enough that a watch ticking would have been audible. His voice was easily audible. She did not turn around. This is the moment that anyone who has experienced this particular variety of dismissal will recognize from the inside. The moment when you realize that the person you have addressed has heard you and decided, without discussion, that you are not worth the turning of a head. It is not a loud cruelty, it is a quiet one. It is the cruelty of being edited out of a room while still physically standing in it. Keanu did not flinch. He did not make a sound of impatience. He did not perform being ignored for the benefit of any imaginary audience. He simply stood there and processed, privately, what had just happened. Across the store, Derek Soames, senior floor associate, 2 years in the role, recently promoted, glanced over. He was in the middle of laying a bracelet against a velvet comparison pad for the woman in the cream blazer, and the movement of his eyes toward Keanu was brief, professional, automatic. The kind of visual sweep a floor associate makes continuously, monitoring the room. He saw the gray jacket. He saw the boots. He made a calculation. He looked back at the woman in the cream blazer. She was, by any visible measure, the safer investment of his attention. She was dressed in the language the store recognized. She was engaging with the product, asking specific questions, handling the bracelet with the ease of someone who has handled expensive things before. She was, in the vocabulary of luxury retail, a qualified customer, someone who had already communicated their belonging through surface signals before a single word was exchanged. Derek stayed where he was. This is not a unique story. This is a documented, studied, measurable reality of luxury retail worldwide. A 2019 study published in the Journal of Retailing, and this is real, found that customers perceived as lower status based on appearance received measurably less assistance and slower service response times in upscale retail environments, regardless of their actual purchasing intent or ability. The study found that store staff were often unaware they were doing it. The bias operated below the level of conscious decision. It was environmental, cultural, built into the architecture of what these spaces rewarded and what they ignored. Brianna Loft had not invented this behavior. She had been trained into it without ever being given a training document that said so. She had been trained by watching which customers senior staff rushed toward and which they allowed to orbit the room unattended. She had been trained by commission structures that rewarded fast assessments. She had been trained by 1,000 small moments of modeling that together built a picture of who deserved immediate attention and who could wait. She was not a cruel person. She would have been horrified to be described as one. But she was, in this moment, doing a cruel thing, and the man she was doing it to was standing 8 feet away from her, holding something heavy that no one in this store knew he was holding. Keanu waited another moment. Then he tried again. He was careful about how he phrased it. This also is a real thing about him, observable across decades of interviews and first-hand accounts. He is careful with his words, not because he is calculating, but because he is considerate. He thinks about the effect of language on the person receiving it. He does not want to make someone else's day harder, even when they are in the process of making his harder. "Hi, I'm sorry to bother you." He said it with complete sincerity. No sarcasm wrapped in politeness. No edge concealed in the phrasing. He was genuinely sorry to interrupt whatever she was doing. "I'm looking for a gift." "A watch. I was hoping someone could help me." Brianna turned. The turn itself took a moment longer than it should have. She completed what she was doing with the display first, or pretended to, and then turned, and then arranged her face into the expression that luxury retail trains its staff to wear in place of a genuine one. It is a specific expression. The smile has width, but not depth. The eyes are assessing while the mouth is welcoming. It is an expression that is simultaneously open and closed. "Are you looking for something in a particular price range?" she asked. Let the question sit for a moment. Consider its architecture. This is not a customer service question. In the vocabulary of genuine service, the equivalent question would be, "What's the occasion?" Or, "What kind of person are you shopping for?" Or simply, "What can I help you find?" These are questions that begin with the customer's need. The question Brianna asked began with something else. It began with a qualifier. It began with the implicit request that the customer prove his right to be in the conversation before the conversation properly started. "Tell me what you can afford." That is what the question meant. "So I can tell you whether helping you is worth my time." Keanu looked at her for a moment. People who know him well describe a quality he has in moments of friction. A stillness that is not coldness. He doesn't go cold. He doesn't go hard. He becomes, if anything, more present, more focused, as if difficulty requires him to be more fully in the room rather than less. His eyes, which are dark, and which have been described by people in his industry as unusually attentive, the eyes of a man who is actually watching, actually listening, not performing either. His eyes rested on Brianna with a quality of attention she may not have expected from the man in the gray jacket. "Something meaningful," he said. "Price isn't the concern." 4 words, said without display. Not "I can afford anything in this store," or "money is no object." The phrases that people use when they want to signal wealth, when they want to win the appraisal game by making the other person feel small for having played it. He said, "Price isn't the concern." He told her what mattered to him and left the rest alone. It should have been enough. By any standard of professional service, it was more than enough. It was a clear, direct, dignified statement of what the customer needed. Brianna's smile did not change. She did not reach for the display case. She did not move toward him. She said, with the same practiced neutrality she might use to read from a laminated menu, "Our pieces in this section start at $18,000. A statement delivered as a question. A price point offered as a door that opened or closed, depending on whether you flinched. Keanu did not flinch. "I understand," he said. His voice was completely level. Could I still see the Calatrava? The one on the left. He had named the specific watch. He had identified it by its correct name without consulting anything, without pointing uncertainly at the case, without any of the behavioral signals that would mark him as someone unfamiliar with this world. He had named it the way someone names it when they have done their research, when they know what they're looking for, when they came in with intention. This should have told her something. There was a pause. The kind of pause that is not a pause for thought. The kind that is a pause for effect. That communicates, without saying anything that could be quoted or complained about, "I am deciding whether you deserve this." "Let me just finish something," Brianna said, and she turned back to her display case. She did not finish anything. She arranged a tray that did not need arranging. She made 2 small adjustments that made no visible difference. She performed the conclusion of a task that had not existed before Keanu spoke to her. And Keanu stood there, alone, in a store that had looked at him twice now and made the same decision twice. In a store where someone in a cream blazer at the far end of the room was receiving an entirely different quality of humanity. In a store full of beautiful objects, whose beauty was being weaponized, turned from an invitation into an exclusion. He stood there, and he was not angry. This is the important thing. People expect the anger. They expect the moment where the famous person reveals themselves and the store employees are shamed by the reveal. And the wish fulfillment of that structure is clean and satisfying. But Keanu Reeves was not performing restraint. He genuinely was not angry. He was something quieter and harder to name. He was the man underneath the fame, which is the man who has buried a best friend and buried a daughter and sat beside people he loved in the darkest rooms imaginable, and who has decided somewhere along the way that this world contains real suffering and real beauty, and the space between a man and a watch display case on Rodeo Drive is not where he plans to spend whatever anger he has. He looked around the store. He looked at the carpet and the chandelier and the cases full of objects that measured time. He thought about Marcus. He thought about 23 years of quiet, uncelebrated, physical devotion to work that no one in this building would ever know anything about. Then he did something that neither Brianna nor Derek had seen a customer do before. He sat down. There was a small upholstered bench against the wall near the first display case. The kind of bench that exists in stores like this, as a hospitality gesture. Something for a valued client to sit on while pieces are brought out for their consideration. It was there for the customers in the cream blazers. It was there for the people the store had already decided belonged. Keanu sat down on it anyway. He sat down with the ease of a man who has decided he is comfortable wherever he is. He folded his hands in his lap. He set his feet flat on the floor. He was not making a statement. He was not staging a protest. He was simply a man who had things to carry, and who had chosen to carry them sitting down, in patience, in the absolute confidence that he would eventually be helped, or he would eventually leave, and that either outcome was acceptable. He looked at the Calatrava through the glass of the display case. It looked back at him from its velvet mount, telling him nothing about the time, because no one had wound it. And then, from behind a door of dark frosted glass at the far end of the store, a door with a small brushed metal handle and no label, came the sound of footsteps. The footsteps stopped. There was a pause behind the frosted glass, the small administrative pause of someone checking something before they step out, a clipboard or a phone or a thought. And then the pause ended, and the footsteps resumed, and then they stopped again, and the door did not open yet. Keanu sat on the bench and listened to the store breathe. A luxury store has its own respiratory system. The subtle cycling of climate-controlled air. The occasional soft footfall on deep carpet. The muted clink of a bracelet being set back into its tray. The creak, almost imperceptible, of the older gentleman near the door shifting his weight as he considered the cufflinks. These sounds were so carefully managed, so acoustically contained, that they functioned less like noise and more like a kind of expensive silence. Silence with texture, silence that cost money per square foot. Keanu sat inside it and was still. This was something he had learned not on a film set, not from a director or an acting coach, but much earlier and much harder. The capacity to be still inside a storm that no one around him could see. He had learned it in 1993, sitting with River Phoenix, in the months before Phoenix's death on October 31st of that year, when Phoenix was already moving in a direction that Keanu recognized but could not stop. He had learned it again in 1999, the year that broke him open and remade him in ways that people who only know him from his films will never fully understand. That year, 1999, was the year The Matrix changed cinema. It was also the year Keanu Reeves sat in a hospital with his girlfriend, Jennifer Syme, after their daughter, Ava Archer Syme Reeves, was delivered stillborn on December 24th, 8 months into a pregnancy that had been healthy and wanted and full of the particular hope that only an expected child can generate. Ava was buried on December 29th. Jennifer, devastated and altered by the loss in ways that would eventually prove irreversible, died in a car accident 18 months later, in April 2001. These are facts. They are not inserted here for effect. They are inserted here because they are the architecture of the man sitting on the bench. They are why he is the way he is. Why the dismissal of 2 sales associates in a luxury store registers not as an outrage, but as something small and manageable against the register of what outrage actually feels like. He sat with his hands folded, and he looked at the Calatrava. And then his phone vibrated. He pulled it from the pocket of David Leitch's gray jacket. The screen showed a name he knew as well as his own. Sandra. Just the one name, no last name, the way the most familiar numbers live in a phone without ceremony. Sandra Hale. Marcus's wife of 27 years. A woman Keanu had known since the late 90s. A former costume department supervisor who had met Marcus on the set of a mid-budget action film in New Mexico and had known within 2 weeks that she was going to marry him, a decision she had described to Keanu once as the only truly automatic thing she had ever done. She was warm and direct, and funny in the way that people who have spent a long time around film sets become funny, with an economy of language and a complete immunity to pretension. She did not text casually. When Sandra texted, it was because something needed to be said. Keanu opened the message. It was 4 lines, short enough to read in a breath, long enough to change the temperature of the room. He went to the doctor on Tuesday. They found something. He didn't want anyone to know before the party. He asked me not to tell you. But I thought you should know. He's been scared, Keanu. He hasn't said it out loud, but I can see it. I know you can handle this. I didn't know who else to tell. Keanu read it once. He read it again. He sat very still on the upholstered bench in the middle of Arlington and Cole, with Brianna Loft's back still turned to him, and the Calatrava still unlit in its velvet mount, and Derek Soames still attending to the woman in the cream blazer, and he held the phone in both hands, and he let the information arrive the way real information arrives. Not all at once, but in layers. The first layer is the words. The second is what the words mean. The third, and the deepest, is what they mean to you specifically, in the context of your specific love for the specific person they concern. Marcus had been to the doctor on Tuesday. It was now Thursday. For 2 days, Marcus Hale had known that something had been found, and he had told no one except Sandra. He had protected his friends from the knowledge. He had continued planning the details of his own retirement party. Sandra had mentioned he'd spent Tuesday evening on the phone with the restaurant about dietary restrictions for 2 of the guests, carrying a fear that Keanu could not yet name or size, carrying it quietly and without making it anyone else's problem, which was exactly what Marcus Hale had done with every painful thing in his life for as long as Keanu had known him. The mass was near his left lung. That detail was not in Sandra's text. Keanu would not learn that specific detail until he called Sandra back that evening, after the store, after the drive home, sitting in his kitchen with his 3rd coffee going cold beside him. But even without the specific detail, the shape of it was clear. Something had been found. Marcus was scared. Marcus was not saying he was scared. Keanu put the phone back in his pocket. He looked up at the ceiling for a moment, not for any particular reason, not performing contemplation, just the instinctive motion of a man absorbing something, finding a neutral space to look while the internal work happens. The chandelier hung overhead, its arrangement of glass and light designed to suggest effortless abundance. It was very beautiful. Keanu looked at it for 3 or 4 seconds and then looked back down at the display case. He still wanted the watch, not despite what Sandra had told him. Because of it. Because the watch had just shifted its meaning. It had been, 20 minutes ago, a retirement gift, a gesture of celebration for a chapter closed and a life well lived. Now it was something else, something harder to name but more urgent. It was a message sent in advance of a fear that might or might not materialize. It was a way of saying, before we know what this is, before the results come back and the next chapter reveals itself, I want you to have something in your hand that says you have always mattered, and you will always matter, and I am not going anywhere regardless of what the next page says. This is the specific grammar of Keanu Reeves's love for the people close to him. It is not expressed in declarations. It is expressed in presence and objects, and the specific weight of showing up without being asked. It was expressed in the personal checks he wrote to crew members on The Matrix when the studio gave him a bonus he felt he hadn't earned alone. It was expressed in the year after Jennifer Syme's accident, when he largely withdrew from public life, not in collapse but in mourning, in the private work of grief that has no publicist and no premiere. The watch had become more important in the 3 minutes since Sandra's text. He needed to find it. He needed someone to help him find it. He looked across the store at Brianna's back. She had not moved toward him. She had not so much as glanced in his direction since the exchange that had ended with, "Let me just finish something." 7 minutes had passed since those words. The something had never concluded. The display she was arranging was immaculate and unchanging, and had nothing further to offer her. And yet she remained at it, because to turn around would be to acknowledge that she had no intention of helping the man in the gray jacket, and she was not yet ready to do that consciously. Derek Soames had completed the sale at the far end of the store. The woman in the cream blazer had signed her receipt and was now accepting the small branded bag with both hands. The way people accept things from stores like this, with a particular practiced ease that communicates, "This is not unusual for me." Derek was folding tissue paper. He glanced up at Keanu once, assessed that Brianna was handling it, or would handle it, or had some plan for it, and began resetting his display. No one was coming. Keanu made a decision, not a dramatic one. He did not stand up and announce himself. He did not take out his phone and call his agent or his publicist, or anyone who could arrive and change the power structure of the room in an instant. He did not say anything cutting or memorable. He simply shifted his posture slightly on the bench and settled in with more deliberate patience. The patience of a man who has decided he is not leaving, who has something to find in this building and intends to find it, and is willing to wait whatever waiting is required. He thought about Marcus on Tuesday evening, on the phone with a restaurant, asking about dietary restrictions, knowing what the doctor had said, carrying it alone. He thought about 23 years of work. The collarbone, twice. The knee in Prague. The quiet. He thought about the Calatrava on its velvet mount, 4 feet away, through a sheet of glass. He thought, "Marcus, you have no idea the lengths I am going to," and almost smiled. And then, for the second time, the sound of footsteps came from behind the frosted glass door at the far end of the store. This time they did not stop. This time they were purposeful, consistent. The footsteps of someone who has decided they are needed on the floor and is moving accordingly. The brushed metal handle turned. The door opened. And Corinne Tassard stepped out, carrying her second coffee of the morning and a folder of inventory reports, and looked across her store with the efficient and practiced gaze of a woman who has managed this particular space for 11 years and who misses very little. Her eyes swept the room. Derek at his display case. Brianna at her display case. The older gentleman, who had now chosen a set of cufflinks and was carrying them toward the register. The woman in the cream blazer, leaving through the front door with her bag, and the man on the bench. She stopped. Not completely. She did not halt in the doorway. She took one full step onto the floor, and then her pace changed, fractionally, in the way that a change of thought changes a body before the mind has fully finished the thought. Something about the man on the bench. She didn't know yet what it was, but she was already moving toward it. Corinne Tassard had a rule about the floor. It was not a written rule. It was not in any employee handbook or operations manual or training document that Arlington & Cole had produced in its 14 years on Rodeo Drive. It was a personal rule, the kind that forms slowly over years of watching and learning and making mistakes and correcting them. The kind that lives in the body rather than the mind, in the way the feet move when they step onto the floor, in the way the eyes adjust, in the way the entire self shifts gear from the private person in the back office to the professional presence that the floor requires. The rule was simple. When you step onto the floor, you see everything. Not just the customers, not just the product, not just the staff, everything. The temperature of a conversation from across the room, the angle of a customer's shoulders, the particular quality of a silence between two people that tells you whether the silence is comfortable or strained, the body language of a sales associate who is doing something wrong and doesn't know you're watching, the body language of a customer who has been waiting too long and is deciding, quietly and without drama, whether to leave. 11 years of stepping onto this floor had made this seeing automatic, involuntary, the way experienced drivers process the road without consciously choosing to. Corinne walked out of her office, and her eyes did their work before her coffee had reached her lips. Derek Soames, resetting his display after a completed sale. Fine. Brianna Loft, standing at her display case near the entrance, back partially turned, arranging something. Corinne's eyes moved to what Brianna was arranging. The display did not need arranging. The display was, from this distance, already perfect. Her eyes moved to the man on the bench. She took him in the way she took in all customers, fully, without hierarchy, with the attention her father had taught her to give to anyone who walked through a door carrying something they needed. Her father, André Tassard, had operated his watch repair shop on Rue de la République in Lyon for 31 years without taking a single day off. He was 79 years old and still went in 3 days a week, because the owner called him when the difficult work arrived, and because André Tassard believed, with the quiet conviction of a man who had thought carefully about what mattered, that a person who stops doing the work they love does not rest. They simply become less themselves. He had told Corinne, when she was 12 years old and sitting on a stool beside his workbench watching him disassemble a pocket watch that had not run in 40 years, that every object that comes through a repair shop door carries a story, and the story is always more important than the object. The watch is just the physical address of the story. The story is what the person actually brought you. She had built 11 years of management on that idea. She looked at the man on the bench. Gray jacket, dark jeans, worn boots, unshaved jaw, hair tied back. Hands folded in his lap with a quality of stillness that was not the stillness of someone who had given up or was killing time, but the stillness of someone who was waiting with intention, who had decided to wait and was doing it the way serious people do serious things, with their full attention applied to the act. He was looking at the first display case. Specifically, from this angle, he appeared to be looking at the left end of the case, where the Calatrava was. Corinne had sold 11 Patek Philippe Calatravas in her 11 years at this store. She remembered every single one of them, not because she kept a record. She did, but the record was not why she remembered, but because each one had come with a story. A father buying for a son on the occasion of a first real job. A woman buying for herself on the occasion of a divorce that had taken 4 years to survive, and that she was celebrating by owning something serious and lasting and entirely hers. A man who had saved for 3 years, and who held the watch for a long time before he said yes, and whose hands shook slightly when he handed it back for boxing. The Calatrava attracted a specific kind of customer. Not the flashiest, not the loudest. The ones who wanted something that would last. Something that did not need anyone else to understand its value. Something that told time quietly and well for decades and asked for nothing in return. She looked at the man on the bench. She looked at Brianna's back. She crossed the floor. She moved at a pace that was not rushed. Rushing signals alarm, and alarm signals to a customer that something has gone wrong, which makes them feel like a problem rather than a priority. But it was not a leisurely pace either. It was the pace of someone correcting something that needed correcting, doing it with the minimum of theater. "Good morning," she said, when she was close enough. She did not speak from a distance. She came to him, which is the first principle of real service. You go to the person. You do not make the person come to you. She came to within a comfortable conversational distance, and she stopped, and she looked at him directly, and she said good morning, the way her father said good morning, which was as though the morning were actually good, and your presence in it were something worth acknowledging. Keanu looked up. The look lasted only a fraction of a second, but Corinne had spent 11 years reading fractions of seconds, and what she read in that fraction was not what she expected. She expected, from a man who had been sitting unattended on that bench, some version of frustration, the controlled or uncontrolled irritation of a customer who has waited too long and wants acknowledgement of that. What she saw instead was something else, something that took her a moment to identify because it was not the emotion the situation called for. Relief. Clean and uncomplicated. The relief of a man who has been carrying something alone and has just seen someone walking toward him who might be willing to help carry it. "Good morning," he said. "I'm so sorry," Corinne said, and she meant it the way you mean something when the apology is not a professional formula, but an actual response to an actual wrong. "Has no one helped you?" He paused before answering. The pause was not long, but it was honest. The pause of a man who is deciding whether to be truthful about a thing that he could just as easily wave away. He chose truthful. "I've been waiting a little while," he said. "But it's okay. No rush." "There is absolutely a rush," Corinne said. She said it firmly, without apology for the firmness. "I apologize, please." She gestured toward the display case, an open and inclusive gesture, the gesture of someone removing a barrier rather than maintaining one. "Tell me what you're looking for." And Keanu Reeves told her. He did not tell her his name. He did not tell her what he did. He told her what he needed, which is the only thing that actually mattered in that room. And he told her in a way that was so unperformed, and so specific, and so clearly coming from somewhere real, that Corinne felt it the way you feel something that is true. Not in the mind first, but somewhere behind the sternum, the body registering authenticity before the brain has finished processing the words. He told her about his friend. Not Marcus's name, he protected that without thinking. The reflex of someone who keeps other people's privacy as naturally as he keeps his own. He told her about a man who had spent 23 years doing work that no one photographed. A man who had absorbed punishment so that the work could be beautiful, and no one watching the beauty would ever think about the cost. A man who had broken bones and torn ligaments, and healed, and come back, and never once required anyone to notice. A man who was retiring, whose retirement was being marked by a small gathering of people who actually knew him, and who deserved something he could carry for the rest of his life that said, "The right people saw you." Corinne listened. She listened the way her father listened when customers brought him their watches, with her complete attention on the person rather than the product, because the product was only the ending of the story, and you couldn't understand the ending without understanding the story. When Keanu finished, she did not immediately speak. She let the story settle for just a moment, which is a thing that very few people do anymore. The allowing of a story to occupy its proper space before the response begins. Then she looked at the display case. She reached for her keys. Each display case in the store had its own small lock, and Corinne Tassard carried the master on a simple ring in her jacket pocket. Not on a lanyard, not clipped to a belt, just in the pocket, accessible without theater. She fit the key and opened the case in one practiced motion. She did not reach for the date just. She did not reach for the reverso. She reached for the left end of the case, where the Patek Philippe Calatrava sat on its charcoal velvet mount, and she lifted it with both hands, with the particular care of someone who understands that they are handling not just an object, but the physical address of a story, and she placed it on the velvet presentation pad on top of the case. Between them, there for both of them to look at together, which is the correct way to show someone a watch. Keanu looked at it. Not the way a person looks at something they want to buy, the way a person looks at something they recognize. The recognition of finding a thing that matches a feeling you've been carrying around without knowing its shape. "Yes," he said, very quietly, the word landing with the particular weight of something that has been settled. "That's exactly it." Corinne smiled. The real kind. She couldn't help it. And then she looked at him, not to check on the watch, not to read his reaction to the price she was about to discuss. She looked at him in the way that you look at someone when something about them has asked for your full attention, without their knowing they have asked for it. She looked at his face, and then she looked, as her eyes moved in the natural course of looking at a person, at his hands, which were resting on the edge of the display case, and then at the cuff of his jacket sleeve. And the thing she saw there made her hands go still. It was a bracelet, thin, simple. Blue thread wound into a basic braid, the kind of thing sold at market stalls and craft fairs and school fundraisers. The kind of thing that costs almost nothing and is therefore worth everything it represents. It was tied rather than clasped, which meant someone had tied it onto his wrist, which meant the giving of it had been an act that required proximity and attention and a certain deliberate tenderness. It was worn, the thread thinned in places, softened in others, a few individual strands beginning to separate at the edge of the braid where the friction of daily life had found the weakest point. He had been wearing it for a long time. He had not taken it off. Corinne felt something move in her chest. Her daughter Emma was 23 years old and lived in San Francisco and called every Sunday, which was more than Corinne deserved and more than most mothers of 23-year-olds got, and she knew it. Emma had been 6 years old when she made her mother a bracelet for Mother's Day. Blue thread, simple braid, tied around Corinne's wrist with the focused solemnity of a child performing an important ceremony. Corinne had worn it until the thread broke, which took 4 months of daily wearing. She had gathered the broken pieces and put them in a small ceramic dish on her bedroom dresser, the dish she usually used for loose change, and they were still there. wound together in a small, loose pile, faded now from their original blue to something softer, between blue and gray. She had never told anyone she kept them. She looked at the bracelet on the wrist of the man who was looking at the Calatrava. She thought about what he had just told her. The friend, the years, the quiet damage, the need to find something lasting. She thought about the fact that this man, whoever he was, had something tied to his wrist that someone had given him with their hands, that he had not removed, that he was wearing in a luxury store on Rodeo Drive with worn boots and a borrowed jacket, while 2 of her staff members had decided, in under 4 seconds, that he was not worth walking toward. The mathematics of it landed on her fully. The man they had ignored was a man who understood exactly what a gift meant, who had driven here alone to find something meaningful for someone who was scared and didn't want to say so, carrying his own private weight, sitting patiently on a bench for 43 minutes, holding the quality of his grief and his love and his intention without spilling any of it on anyone. And her store had made him wait in a silence that was designed to make him feel small. She raised her eyes from the bracelet to his face. She looked at him properly, fully, without the professional filter, and she recognized him, not from the jacket or the boots, not from any ambient expectation of what a movie star looks like when they walk into a store. She recognized him the way you recognize someone you know deeply and suddenly see from across a room, from the particular geometry of the face, from something in the eyes that matched a memory. The Matrix, Paris, 1999. A cinema on the left bank. The scene where Neo stops the bullets and the world goes slow around him, and for a moment, everything that was impossible becomes actual. John Wick. Sunday evenings on her laptop in an empty store, the week not started yet. She knew this face. Mr. Reeves, she said. She said it quietly, not as an announcement, not with the particular electricity that celebrity recognition usually carries. The gasp, the reach for a phone, the sudden behavioral shift that turns a person into an audience. She said it the way you say the name of someone who deserved to be treated better than they were, as an acknowledgement that carries an apology inside it. He met her eyes. He did not straighten. He did not shift into a public register. He did not become, in that moment, Keanu Reeves the movie star, as opposed to the man in the gray jacket who had been sitting on the bench. He simply looked at her, steadily, with those dark, attentive eyes, and gave a small nod. The nod said, "Yes, and it doesn't change anything, but thank you for seeing me." Corinne took one breath. She had managed this store through a celebrity buying a watch for his third wife, through a billionaire's representative making unreasonable demands for 6 hours, through 2 attempted thefts and 1 medical emergency, and a moment in 2022 when a famous actor had become verbally abusive to a junior staff member over a shipping delay, and Corinne had asked him to leave, and he had left because she had asked with the full authority of someone who knew exactly whose store this was. She had maintained her composure through all of it. She maintained it now. But her hands, she would think about this later, her hands, resting on the edge of the display case beside the Calatrava on its velvet pad, were completely still. Not the stillness of composure. The stillness of someone who has just understood something important and needs a moment to hold it before it becomes action. "How long were you waiting?" she asked. "It wasn't long," he said. He said it without discomfort, without the edge that the question deserved. He said it the way you say something when you have decided not to make an accounting of what was done to you, when the ledger is real, but you have chosen not to open it in this moment. Corinne looked at him for another second. Then she made a decision. Not about Brianna, not about Derek, not about the training program or the culture or the 11 years of architecture she would spend the next several weeks quietly, systematically dismantling and rebuilding from the foundation. Those decisions would come, and they would be real, and she would follow through on them in the way she followed through on everything. Without announcement, without drama, one deliberate step at a time. The decision she made now was simpler. She placed both hands flat on the glass of the display case. She looked at the Calatrava. She looked at the man standing across from her with a worn blue bracelet on his wrist, and a story about a friend in his chest, and 43 minutes of quiet dignity behind him. "I'm going to take care of everything," she said, "and I owe you a sincere apology." He shook his head, gently but clearly. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "You helped me. That's enough." Behind Corinne, at her display case near the entrance, Brianna Loft had turned around. She was looking at the manager. She was looking at the man the manager was speaking to. She could not hear the conversation from this distance, but she could see the quality of it, the forward lean, the focused attention, the way Corinne Tassard was giving this customer the full weight of her considerable professional presence. Brianna looked at the man's face. She still did not fully recognize him, but she felt, in the hollow space below her ribs, the first movement of an understanding that had not yet become conscious, the feeling of a mistake arriving before the mind has agreed to call it one. The Calatrava sat on its velvet pad between Corinne and Keanu, telling them nothing about the time. But the story it was part of was just beginning its most important chapter. Corinne did not move immediately. She stood at the display case with her hands flat on the glass and let the moment be what it was. Not a celebrity encounter, not a retail transaction, not a management crisis requiring immediate procedural response. She let it be a moment between two people standing on either side of a watch that one of them needed to give to someone he loved, and she gave it the weight it deserved before she did anything else. This was something her father had taught her without meaning to teach it. André Tassard had never given a lesson in emotional intelligence. He had never sat Corinne down and explained the importance of being present in difficult moments. He had simply been present, consistently and without exception. In every difficult moment, Corinne had witnessed him navigate across her entire childhood. The customer who came in crying because the watch that needed repair had belonged to her husband who died 3 weeks ago, and André had sat with her for 40 minutes without once suggesting she come back another time. The apprentice who broke a movement worth 4,000 francs and stood in the workshop pale and shaking, and André had looked at the broken pieces and said, "We'll learn something from this." The winter the shop's heating failed, and he worked in his coat for 6 weeks, rather than close, because 3 of his regular customers were elderly and the shop was warm to them in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Presence. Consistent, unconditional, unperformed presence. Corinne had inherited it the way you inherit a way of walking, or a particular expression. Not through instruction, but through proximity. Through years of watching someone be a certain way, until that way becomes the water you swim in. She looked at the Calatrava. Then she looked at Keanu. "May I ask," she said, and her voice was careful in the way that careful voices are careful. Not guarded, not clinical, but deliberate, the way you carry something fragile, how you knew it was the right one. Before I showed it to you. You knew the name, you knew where it was in the case. It was a genuine question, not a strategy, not professional small talk designed to relax a customer before a sale. She wanted to know. Keanu looked at the watch for a moment before he answered. "I spent about 2 weeks thinking about what Marcus—" He stopped, used the name, then continued, because the name had come out before he could make the calculation to withhold it, and once a name is out, it would be stranger to reach back for it. Marcus worked with his hands his whole career. He made things work that shouldn't have worked. He made things safe that were inherently dangerous. He was the most precise person I've ever watched do a job." He paused. "The Calatrava doesn't try to be more than it is. It's just a perfect expression of what a watch should do." That felt right for him. Corinne was quiet for a moment. "My father would have liked that answer very much," she said. Keanu looked at her. "Your father knows watches?" "My father is watches," she said. 31 years repairing them in Lyon. He's retired, mostly. He still goes in. He says a man who stops doing the work he loves stops being himself. She said this last part with the particular mixture of pride and wry affection that adult children have for parents who are, despite everything, exactly right about the things they're right about. Keanu smiled. The real one, the one that has been photographed thousands of times and somehow manages to look, in every photograph, like something that was not intended to be photographed. The one that reaches his eyes and stays there for a moment after it has left his mouth. He sounds like he figured something out, Keanu said. He figured out the one important thing, Corinne said. The rest he's still working on. They stood in a moment of warmth that neither of them had expected from this morning, and that both of them, Corinne thought, probably needed. Then she straightened. She was, after all, a professional. And there was work to do. I'd like to show you the case options, she said, shifting back into the register of competent service without losing the register of genuine connection, holding both at once, which is the actual skill at the center of every service profession that does it well. And we can discuss the inscription. Whether you'd want one. Keanu's expression shifted at the word inscription. Not dramatically, but Corinne saw it. A small internal movement, the way a face moves when an idea that was already present becomes suddenly more possible. Yes, he said. I'd been thinking about that. 4 words. He said it the way people say things they've been turning over privately for some time, with the particular definiteness of an idea that has completed its formation and is ready to be spoken. I know what they are. You don't have to tell me, Corinne said. We have an engraver. He's extremely discreet. Good, Keanu said simply. She brought out the presentation case, the full Calatrava collection, 3 additional variants for him to consider, and she set them on the velvet pad beside the one he had already identified, not to replace his choice but to confirm it, the way a good guide doesn't tell you which path to take, but walks you to the point where the right path becomes unmistakable. He looked at each one briefly and came back to the first. This one, he said. Yes, Corinne agreed. This one. She reached beneath the counter for the order form, the internal document that initiated the engraving process, the authentication paperwork, the purchase record. Standard procedure. She set it on the glass between them and uncapped her pen and began filling in the preliminary details. She was halfway through the 3rd line when Brianna Loft appeared at her elbow. Not intrusively, not urgently. She materialized in the way that junior staff materialize when they need to speak to a manager during a customer interaction. Close enough to signal need, far enough to signal awareness that an interruption carries a cost. Her posture carried something that Corinne did not immediately look up to read. Corinne, Brianna said quietly. Do you need anything? Can I? I'm all right, thank you, Corinne said. She said it without looking up. Not unkindly, but clearly. Brianna did not leave immediately. She stood for just a beat longer than the exchange required, and in that beat Corinne looked up from the form, and what she saw on Brianna's face was not what she had expected to see. She had expected guilt, or the professional performance of helpfulness that sometimes dressed up as guilt in people who had made mistakes and were now trying to manage the optics of those mistakes. She had expected Brianna to be standing there because she had recognized the customer and was now attempting, through proximity and offered assistance, to retroactively insert herself into a positive outcome she had declined to create. That was not what she saw. What she saw was younger than guilt. Rawer. Brianna was 26 years old, and she was looking at the man in the gray jacket, and her face was doing something undefended and unrehearsed. The particular expression of a young person who has just understood that they have done something real and wrong, not because they've been told so by someone in authority, but because they have looked at the actual person they wronged, and the actual wrongness of it has arrived without mediation. She had finally recognized him, not from a film poster, not from a billboard. She had recognized him the way people recognize someone they have seen 1,000 times and not expected to see here. With the particular jolt of a context collapse, reality suddenly including something it should not, by the logic of her assumptions, have included. Keanu Reeves had been sitting on her bench for 43 minutes. Keanu Reeves had said, "Excuse me," and she had not turned around. Keanu Reeves had said, "I'm sorry to bother you," and she had responded with a price point delivered as a door. The color of Brianna's face had changed. Keanu looked at her. His expression, when he turned toward her, was not cold. It was not the face of a person preparing to deliver a verdict or enjoy a reversal. There are people in the world who would have enjoyed this moment. The satisfaction of watching someone who dismissed you discover what they dismissed. Keanu Reeves was simply not one of those people. His face was the same face it had been all morning. Open, unhurried, slightly tired around the eyes in the way that people who carry real things are always slightly tired. He looked at her the way you look at someone you have no particular feeling about. Not warmly, not coldly, but simply with the steady gaze of someone who sees another person standing in front of them. Brianna opened her mouth. She closed it. She tried again. I'm very sorry," she said. The words came out imperfect, unpolished, the way a genuine apology comes out when it hasn't been prepared in advance and hasn't been coached and is simply the raw material of a person who is sorry, without knowing yet how to wear the sorry in public. I didn't. It's okay," Keanu said. He said it without elaboration. He did not say, "Don't worry about it," which is what people say when they want to minimize a thing without addressing it. He did not say, "I understand," which is what people say when they want to demonstrate magnanimity. He said, "It's okay." Present tense. Simple. A door left open, rather than slammed shut, and also rather than propped open with something heavy, to prove how gracious the opening was. Brianna nodded. She looked like she wanted to say more, and understood that more would be for her benefit rather than his. She went back to her station. Corinne watched her go. She turned back to the form. She finished filling in the third line. She did not remark on what had happened. What had happened was between Brianna and her own conscience, which is where it belonged. She pushed the form across the glass toward Keanu with the pen. He picked up the pen. He wrote the 4 words in the space marked for inscription. He wrote them in a clear, unshowy hand, the handwriting of someone who did not grow up writing for other people to admire, just for the purpose of getting things down. He finished. He set the pen down. He slid the form back. Corinne looked at the 4 words. She had told herself she would not read them, that the inscription was private, that private things belonged to the people they concerned, that a person's message to a friend was not hers to know. She had told herself that. But the form was in front of her, and the words were written clearly, and she read them. She did not repeat them aloud. She did not write them here, in this story, because they still belong to Marcus Hale, whoever he is, wherever he is, wearing that watch. They are his. They were always only ever his. But Corinne Tassard looked at those 4 words, and she did the thing she had promised herself she would not do. The thing she had not done at work in 11 years. The thing she would later describe to her daughter Emma on the phone that evening in San Francisco, and Emma would say, "Mama, that's not embarrassing. That's human." And Corinne would say, "I know, but still." She felt her eyes fill. She did not let the tears fall. She was still a professional. She blinked once, precisely, and the professional composure held its line, and she initialed the form and slid it into the transaction folder and reached beneath the counter for the purchase documentation. But she looked up at Keanu before she did any of that, in the space between reading the words and beginning to move, and she looked at him with the full weight of what the words had made her feel, which was something too large for the professional register to contain. He was already looking at her. "Okay," she said. "Just the word. Meaning, I understand now. I understand all of it." "Okay," he said back. The symmetry of it was so clean and so unplanned that for a moment neither of them moved. Then Corinne straightened her jacket and pulled the purchase documentation toward her, and began the final steps of the transaction, with the focused efficiency of a woman who has remembered that she has a job to do and intends to do it well. And in the beveled mirror behind the display case, in the small sliver of reflection that showed the store behind him, Keanu Reeves could see the bench where he had sat for 43 minutes, and beside it, the display case that no one had opened for him, and above it, the chandelier that had hung over the whole of it without comment. He did not look at the reflection for long. He turned back to the Calatrava. It was going to look exactly right on Marcus Hale's wrist. He was sure of it now. The purchase took 11 minutes. Not because the transaction was complicated. Corinne moved through it with the practiced efficiency of someone who has completed this process hundreds of times and could do it in the dark. But because Keanu was not in a hurry, and Corinne was not going to make him feel like he should be, and 11 minutes was the natural duration of doing something important correctly. She walked him through the authentication certificate, the international warranty, the engraving timeline, 4 business days, delivered to whatever address he preferred, packaged in the full Patek Philippe presentation materials, the outer box and the inner box, and the small booklet that documented the watch's history and specifications with the particular seriousness that the brand applied to everything it produced. He listened to all of it. He did not glance at his phone. He did not shift his weight or look toward the door. He gave her his complete attention, which is a rarer thing than it sounds, particularly from someone who has been sitting in this store for nearly an hour, absorbing a quality of treatment that would have made most people brittle and distracted by the time they reached the purchase stage. He gave her an address in the Hollywood Hills. He handed over a card. She processed it without looking at the name on the card. She already knew who she was serving, and looking at the name on the card now would have felt like a small indignity, the reduction of a person to a confirmation of their identity, as though she needed the plastic to verify what she already understood. The machine processed. The receipt printed. She signed her portion, slid it across, watched him sign his. His signature was quick and unelaborate. The signature of someone who has signed a very large number of things and has long since abandoned any desire to make the signature into a performance. She took the receipt and folded it into the transaction envelope. She placed the Calatrava back into its individual case, the small hinged box lined in cream satin, the clasp closing with the particular soft precision of a thing built to last, and then into the outer presentation box, and then into the branded bag, dark and unshowy, the logo small and tasteful in the way that the most serious brands wear their names, like a whisper rather than a shout. She set the bag on the glass between them. For a moment, neither of them picked it up. It sat there on the counter, this small bag containing a $44,000 watch and 4 words engraved on the back of it, and the weight of a 23-year friendship, and a phone call from Sandra Hale that Keanu was still carrying, and would carry until he could put the watch into Marcus's hand and say without saying it, "I know. I'm here. I see you." Keanu picked up the bag. He held it at his side, with the easiness of someone carrying a thing whose value he understands fully and feels no need to advertise. Not cradled, not displayed, just held. The way you hold something that belongs to someone else and that you are simply transporting from where it was to where it needs to be. He looked at Corinne. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." "Thank you," she said, "for being patient." "I'm good at patient," he said. She believed him entirely. He turned slightly toward the door. Then he stopped. He turned back. And he asked the question that Corinne had not anticipated. The question that would stay with her longer than the recognition, longer than the inscription, longer than the whole morning. "The 2 people who were working when I came in," he said. He said it without pointed emphasis, without loading any word more than another. It was a factual sentence. a reference to a factual circumstance. Are they in trouble? Corinne held his gaze. She considered, for a moment, the several ways she could answer this question. The managerial deflection, the professional reassurance, the careful non-answer that technically communicated nothing while appearing to communicate something. She discarded all of them. He had given her honesty all morning. She owed him the same. "There will be a conversation," she said. He nodded slowly, not in satisfaction, not in the particular vindicated nod of someone who is pleased that consequences are coming, just absorbing the information. "I'd rather there wasn't," he said. "Not on my account." Corinne looked at him. What they did was wrong. "Yes," he said. He didn't soften it, or qualify it, or wrap it in false generosity. He agreed with it plainly, the way honest people agree with true things. It was a pause, short, thoughtful, the pause of someone selecting words with care. "But I've had worse mornings than this, and I don't think it helps anyone to be punished by the size of my bank account." Another pause. "That just makes the same mistake from a different direction. The same mistake from a different direction." Corinne turned that sentence over. She would turn it over many times in the coming days. At her desk, on the drive home, on the phone with Emma, lying awake at 2 in the morning, in the particular alertness of a mind that has been given something it doesn't yet know what to do with. The mistake that Brianna and Derek had made was the mistake of measuring a person against a set of visible markers and finding the measurement more real than the person. To punish them dramatically on the basis of who the person turned out to be, to make their correction proportional to his fame rather than to the actual wrong, would be to commit the same error in reverse. Still measuring by the wrong thing, still making the surface more important than what lay beneath it. He was right. She had known it somewhere before he said it, but he said it better than she would have. "I understand," she said. "Good people," he said, and he meant it not as a defense of Brianna and Derek specifically, but as a statement of what he believed about people in general. That most of them were good, operating inside systems and cultures that quietly asked them to be otherwise, and that the system deserved the examination more than the individuals who had been shaped by it. "I think it's worth looking at what trained them to do it, more than what they did." He said it without lecture, without the elevated moral tone that would have made it a speech rather than a thought. He said it the way you say something you have been thinking for a long time and have finally found the right moment to set down. Corinne nodded once, meaning, considered, filed. "We'll act on it." She would. Within 3 weeks, she would begin the process of rebuilding the floor training program from its foundation. Not with an announcement, not with a memo that described a famous incident, but quietly, structurally, in the way that real changes happen when they are serious. A consultant, new modeling, a set of principles built around her father's philosophy. The story is more important than the object. The person is more important than the surface. But that was 3 weeks away. Right now there was one more thing. She did not know why she said it. Later she would think about it and decide that it was the bracelet, that the bracelet had opened something in her that the professional manager would normally have kept closed, that the sight of that worn blue thread on the wrist of a man in a borrowed jacket had reminded her that the most important exchanges between people happen when both people are willing to be actual rather than performed. "Your friend," she said, "the one the watch is for. I hope he's all right." She did not explain how she knew there was something to hope for. She had not been told. But she had been paying attention all morning, and she was very good at paying attention. And there are things that a person's quality of stillness communicates when they are carrying fear for someone they love. Things that require no words. Keanu looked at her. For a moment, the professional distance between them, manager and customer, server and served, two strangers completing a transaction in a luxury store, collapsed entirely, and they were simply two people who understood something about the cost of loving someone and not being able to fix what was wrong for them. "Me too," he said. Quietly. "I think he will be." She nodded. He picked up the bag, and he turned toward the door, and he walked across the carpet of Arlington and Cole for the last time, past the display cases and the chandelier and the bench where he had sat for 43 minutes, with his hands folded in his lap, and his patience intact, and his intention undiminished. At the far end of the room, near the entrance, Brianna Loft was standing at her station. She saw him coming. She did not step forward, and she did not step back. She held her position with the stillness of someone who understands that they cannot undo what they did, and that they are also not entitled to a resolution scene in which the wronged party makes them feel better about having done it. She simply stood and looked at him as he passed. He glanced at her as he went by. Not a long look, not a significant look, just the brief, natural eye contact of two people occupying the same space, the same glance he might give anyone passing at an arm's length in a store. It lasted less than a second, but it was not nothing. It was the look of someone who sees you. Not the famous version of seeing, not the practiced, public, 1,000-watt attentiveness that celebrities can perform. The plain version. The version available to anyone willing to actually look at another person, rather than through them. He had given her that, after everything. She would think about that look for a long time. Not with comfort. She wasn't entitled to comfort yet, and somewhere in her she knew that, but with the specific quality of attention that comes when something has been given to you that you didn't earn and can't repay, and can only, if you're honest about what it means, try to become someone who deserves it eventually. Keanu pushed open the front door of the store. The March air of Beverly Hills moved against his face, cooler than inside, and real in the way that outside air is always real after a long time in a temperature-controlled interior. He stepped onto the pavement, and the door closed behind him, and the soft, expensive silence of Arlington and Cole sealed itself back into place without him in it. He walked the 2 blocks to where he had parked. He fed no more coins into the meter. There was still time on it, 20 minutes remaining, the meter indifferent to everything that had happened in the store. He put the bag with the presentation box on the passenger seat. He sat in the driver's seat for a moment without starting the engine. He took out his phone. He opened Sandra's message. He read it again, all 4 lines, and then he typed a reply. Short, the way his replies always were. He typed, "I found it. It's the right one. Call you tonight." He set the phone down. He started the engine. He pulled out onto the side street and turned toward Sunset, and drove back through the mid-morning traffic toward home, the radio still off, the windows still slightly down, the March air coming through the gap and doing what air does, simply moving, simply present, filling whatever space it was given, without asking anything from it. In the passenger seat, the dark bag sat with its small, tasteful logo, and its cream satin box, and its $44,000 watch, and its 4 words already committed to metal by the time the watch would be ready, already waiting to be read by the man they were written for. On Keanu's wrist, just visible below the cuff of the borrowed jacket, the blue thread bracelet caught the light through the windshield, faded to something between blue and gray, a few strands beginning to separate where the friction of living had found the weakest point. He had not taken it off. He would not take it off. Whoever had tied it there had done it with their hands, with proximity, with deliberate tenderness. And those 3 things together constituted something that $44,000 watches and borrowed jackets and luxury stores on Rodeo Drive and the whole machinery of fame and wealth and judgment were not equipped to touch. He drove home, and behind him, in a store that was already beginning, in some fundamental way, to be different from the store it had been 2 hours ago, Corinne Tassard stood at the display case and looked at the velvet pad where the Calatrava had been, which was now empty, which was the right shape for something to be when the thing that belongs on it has found its way to the person it was always meant for. She picked up her phone. She called a number she should have called more recently than she had. It rang twice. "Corinne," said her father's voice, warm and unhurried, and slightly surprised the way he was always slightly surprised when she called outside of their usual Sunday schedule, as though each unexpected call was a small gift he hadn't prepared for, and was therefore more pleased to receive. "Papa," she said, "I need to tell you about my morning." André Tassard listened without interrupting. This was his particular gift. Not the watching, not the repairing, not the 31 years of coaxing stopped hearts back into motion with tools small enough to lose on a carpet. His gift was the listening. The complete, unhurried, full-bodied listening of a man who had understood early that most people spend the time when another person is speaking, preparing what they will say next, and that this habit, however universal, is a form of absence, and that absence is the one thing you can never retrieve once you've spent it. He had listened this way to Corinne's mother for 44 years of marriage. He had listened this way to customers who came in with watches and left having said things they had not planned to say. He had listened this way to Corinne herself through every stage of her life, through the divorce, through the years of building something in a foreign city, through the Sunday calls that were sometimes fine and sometimes not fine at all, and he had never once finished her sentences, or redirected her toward the practical, or told her what he thought before she had fully finished telling him what she thought. He listened now. Corinne told him everything. Standing behind the display case in the quiet mid-morning store, Derek Soames resetting his displays at the far end, Brianna Loft returned to her station with a quality of stillness that had not been there before. Corinne told her father about the man in the gray jacket, and the 43 minutes, and the Calatrava, and the blue thread bracelet on the worn wrist, and the 4 words she had read and would not repeat, and the way he had said, "That just makes the same mistake from a different direction." She told him about the bench. She told him about the inscription. She told him about the friend. No name, because she had no name, but the shape of the friendship, the 23 years, the collarbone twice, the knee in Prague, the quiet, unwavering devotion to work that no camera recorded. She told him about her eyes filling. André was quiet for a moment after she finished. Outside the shop window on Rue de la République in Lyon, she could picture it exactly, had pictured it her whole life. That window with its small hand-lettered sign and the display of 3 watches in a velvet-lined case that had not changed its arrangement in her entire memory. A Tuesday morning in March would be moving through its ordinary business. Pedestrians, a delivery van, the smell of bread from the boulangerie 2 doors down that had been there since before Corinne was born. The bracelet, André said finally. Not a question, an identification. He had listened to the whole of it and selected the bracelet as the thing worth naming first. "Yes," Corinne said. "Someone put it on his wrist," André said. "Yes. And he kept it. It was very worn, Papa. He'd kept it a long time." Another silence. The comfortable kind. The kind that exists between people who have spent enough time together that silence is not a failure of communication, but another form of it. "You know what a watch is," André said. It was not a question either. He had told her this, in various forms, across the entire span of her life. A watch is a promise. You wind it and you wear it, and every time you look at it, it tells you that time is passing, and you are here for it. That is the promise. The best watches keep it for 100 years. "I know, Papa." "The bracelet is the same," he said. "Different material. Same promise." Someone said to him, "I am here. I will stay." A pause. And he believed them enough to keep it. Corinne looked at the empty velvet pad where the Calatrava had been. "Do you know who he was?" André asked. "The man." She hesitated for only a moment. "Yes." "Famous?" "Very." André made a small sound that was not surprise exactly, more the sound of something confirming something he had already suspected. "Famous people are the worst at being seen," he said. "Everyone looks at them. No one sees them. It's the looking without seeing that's the loneliest thing there is." Corinne said nothing. She did not need to. "You saw him," Andre said. Too late, she said. He waited 43 minutes. But you saw him, he repeated. Gently insistent. The way he was gently insistent about things that mattered. The way he had been gently insistent about her calling more often. About eating real meals. About the importance of keeping one room in your home where no work was allowed to enter. The seeing matters regardless of the timing. Seeing is not nothing. Corinne closed her eyes briefly, opened them. The store was quiet. The chandelier distributed its expensive light across the carpet without opinion. He said something, she said, about my father, before he left. What did he say? She told him. Word for word, because she had kept them precisely. The way Keanu had said your father sounds like he figured something out. The ease of it, the complete sincerity, the fact that he had heard that small thing she had said and held it and reflected it back whole on his way out the door. Andre was quiet for a long moment. I like him, he said finally, simply, as though that settled the question of the man's character entirely, which, coming from Andre Tassard, it essentially did. Corinne laughed. The first full laugh of the morning, unguarded and real, and it surprised her slightly the way real laughs sometimes do when they arrive before you've given them permission. I thought you might, she said. They talked for another 20 minutes. About Emma, about the shop, about the spring coming slowly to Lyon, about a particularly difficult pocket watch that had arrived last week with a cracked mainspring and a mystery Andre was enjoying solving. They talked the way they talked when the call was not the Sunday call, but the unexpected call, the one that arrived because something had happened and she needed to hear his voice. Before she hung up, he said, Call more often, Corinne. I know, Papa. Not because something happens, just because. I know. Good, he said, and she could hear the smile in it. The particular smile of a 79-year-old man who has made his peace with the fact that his daughter lives far away and calls on Sundays and occasionally calls on Tuesdays when the world gives her something she needs to put into words and send in his direction. The smile of a man who considers this sufficient and more than sufficient, and is grateful for every version of it. She hung up. She stood for a moment in the quiet of the store. Then she straightened her jacket, the way she straightened it every time she stepped back from something personal and back into something professional, and she walked to the end of the floor where Derek was finishing his display reset, and she said, quietly, When you're done there, I need a few minutes with you and Brianna together. My office. Derek looked up. He read her face. He nodded. The conversation in her office lasted 31 minutes. She would not describe it here, and this story will not describe it either. Because what happened in Corinne Tassard's office on the morning of March 14, 2019, between a manager and two junior staff members, was a private thing. The kind of conversation that is only useful if it happens without an audience, without theater, without the structure of a lesson being delivered and received in front of witnesses. What can be said is this: no one was fired. No formal warning was filed. Corinne had told the man in the gray jacket that there would be a conversation, and she had told him that his preference, no punishment on his account, had been heard, and she honored both of those things simultaneously by making the conversation real and making its consequences structural rather than personal. She talked about what the store was asking of its staff without knowing it was asking. She talked about the 4-second assessment and where it came from, and what it cost the people on the receiving end of it, and what it cost the store, and what it cost, more quietly and more permanently, the people doing the assessing, the way a habit of measuring people against visible surfaces gradually hollows out the capacity to actually see anyone, which is a loss that compounds over time, until one day you look up and realize you have been working with the public for years without having genuinely encountered a single person. She talked about her father. She did not plan to. It arrived in the conversation organically, the way the most useful things arrive, not arranged in advance but surfacing, because the moment called for them. She told them about Andre and the watch repair shop, and the 44 years of listening, and the idea that every object that comes through the door is just the physical address of a story. Brianna Loft sat with her hands folded on her lap and did not say much. She did not need to say much. Her face said it. 7 days later, on the evening of March 21st, 2019, a small restaurant in Silver Lake called Mira, warm, wood-paneled, the kind of place where the candles are real and the tables are close together and the noise level is exactly right, held a private gathering for 14 people. The reservation was under Sandra Hale's name. The table ran along the back wall and had been arranged specifically at Sandra's request. One long table, rather than rounds, because she wanted everyone to be able to see each other, because this was not the kind of evening that should have its back turned to itself. There was a playlist. Sandra had spent 4 evenings building it. Songs that Marcus loved, songs from the sets he had worked. One song from a film they had seen together on their 3rd date in Albuquerque in 1992 that he thought she had forgotten, and she had never forgotten. There was a cake that said Legend in green buttercream frosting on white, and when Marcus saw it, he made the face he always made when something true was said about him directly. The slightly pained, slightly grateful expression of a man who has never learned to receive a compliment without simultaneously wanting to deflect it. "Who approved that?" he said, looking at the cake. "I did," Sandra said. "Sit down." He sat down. Keanu arrived at 7:15, alone, in a dark jacket that was actually his own. He had shaved. His hair was down. He greeted everyone at the table, the stunt coordinators, the assistant directors, the props supervisor named Ruth Callan, who had worked alongside Marcus since 2001, and who had driven up from San Diego specifically for this evening, and who hugged Keanu with the ease of someone who has known him long enough to hug him without asking. He sat near the middle of the table. He ate. He talked. He laughed at Marcus's stories about the early days, the low-budget productions in the early 90s, the equipment that barely worked, the shoots that ran so far over schedule they became something else entirely on the way to completion. He did not act like a man who was carrying anything. He was very good at this, at being entirely present in the room he was in, giving the people around him the full weight of his attention, rather than the portion that remained after private worry had taken its share. Those who knew him well might have seen it, a slight quality of watchfulness when his eyes moved to Marcus, a particular quality of listening when Marcus spoke, as though he were filing everything away with extra care, as though the evening were something to be held on to. The dinner lasted 3 hours. People began to leave around 10, the long goodbyes of people who don't see each other often enough and are aware, in the particular bittersweet way of such evenings, that this specific configuration of people in this specific room will not happen again exactly this way. By 10:30, it was mostly just the core of them: Sandra, Marcus, Ruth, 2 others, and Keanu. By 11, it was just the 3 of them: Marcus and Sandra and Keanu, at the end of the long table with the remains of the evening around them. Empty glasses, the demolished cake with Legend still legible in the surviving frosting, someone's forgotten scarf on a chair back. Sandra stood up. "I'm going to find the check," she said. She said it with the deliberate purposefulness of a woman who is creating space for 2 men to have a conversation she knows they need to have. She picked up her bag and walked toward the front of the restaurant and did not hurry. Marcus watched her go. Then he looked at Keanu. "You're quiet tonight," Marcus said. He said it without accusation, with the easy perceptiveness of someone who had known Keanu long enough to know what his quiet meant. "I'm good," Keanu said. "I've just been glad to be here." Marcus nodded. He looked at the table. He looked at the remains of the evening. The good remains. The kind that means something happened here, rather than the kind that means something merely occurred. "Good party," he said. "Very good party," Keanu agreed. A comfortable silence. The kind that old friendships carry in them like furniture. Always there, needing no arrangement. Keanu reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He set the Patek Philippe presentation box on the table between them. It sat there, small, dark, understated, the Patek Philippe name in simple gold lettering on the lid. The whole thing communicating its seriousness without effort. Marcus looked at it. He did not immediately move toward it. He looked at it the way you look at something when you suspect it is going to require something of you. Not in a bad way, but in the way that real things require something. Presence, receptivity, the willingness to be moved. He opened the box. The Calatrava lay in its cream satin bed, catching the candlelight of the restaurant in its rose gold case and its cream dial. Still, perfect, telling the correct time, because Corinne's engraver had wound and set it before boxing it, which was a detail Corinne had specified in the packaging instructions, because she was the kind of professional who understood that a watch presented at the wrong time is a watch that has already told a small lie. Marcus looked at it for a long time. His hands were on either side of the box, but not touching the watch. He looked at it with the expression of a man who has spent 23 years handling the equipment that makes things work, and has developed, through that long handling, a deep respect for objects that do what they were made to do with absolute consistency. He turned the box slightly and looked at the front of the dial. Then, slowly, he picked the watch up and turned it over. He read the back. He read the 4 words. He was still for a long time after that. Not the stillness of someone waiting for the right response to arrive. The stillness of someone who has received something and is holding it with the care it deserves, letting it be what it is without rushing into reaction. He put the watch on his wrist. He fastened the clasp. He held his wrist up and looked at it. The watch on the broad, scarred, twice-broken collarbone wrist of a man who had spent 23 years absorbing what other people couldn't afford to absorb. And the watch looked exactly as right as Keanu had known, standing at the display case on Rodeo Drive 8 days ago, that it would look. Marcus lowered his wrist. He looked at Keanu. "You didn't have to do this," he said. His voice was level, but it was working to be level. "I know," Keanu said. "This is—" Marcus looked at the watch again. He stopped. He tried again. "This is too much." "It isn't," Keanu said simply. Meaning, "I have thought about this carefully, and the calculation does not support your assessment." Meaning, 23 years is not too much. You are not too much. Marcus looked at the table. He cleared his throat once. The short, quiet clearance of a man re-establishing control of a voice that is in danger of becoming something he hasn't planned for in a restaurant. "Sandra told you," he said, not a question. "She told me," Keanu said. "I was going to tell you. After the results." "I know." Marcus looked up. "I'm scared," he said. He said it the way people say something they have been keeping in a closed room for a long time, with the specific relief and specific vulnerability of a door finally opened, of the kept thing finally given air. 2 words, the most honest 2 words available. No performance, no management, just the plain truth of what it felt like to be Marcus Hale on March 21st, 2019, not yet knowing what the biopsy would say, wearing a watch engraved with 4 words that meant he was seen. "I know," Keanu said. "I'm going to be here, whatever it is." Marcus nodded. He looked at the watch. He looked at his friend. And then he said something that he had perhaps never said to Keanu directly in 30 years of friendship. Something that people who are comfortable with each other sometimes forget to say precisely because the comfort has always made it feel implied. "Thank you," he said, "for always showing up." Keanu looked at him for a moment. "Where else would I be?" he said. Not a question. A statement of geography. A statement of fact about who he was, and where he stood, and what it meant to him to stand there. The same statement he had made, in different words, to River Phoenix, to Jennifer Syme, to every person he had ever loved who had needed him in the dark. The same statement that had sent him into a luxury store on Rodeo Drive on a Thursday morning to sit on a bench for 43 minutes, waiting for someone to help him find the right way to say it, in metal and glass, and 4 words on the back. Where else would I be? Sandra came back from the front of the restaurant with the check folder and looked at the two of them, and looked at the watch on Marcus's wrist, and set the folder down and sat beside her husband without saying anything, which was exactly right. Outside Mira, Silver Lake moved through its Thursday evening. Cars, voices, the ordinary business of a city that had no idea what was happening at a back table in a wood-paneled restaurant, or what it meant. 3 days later, the biopsy results came back. Benign. A cyst. Non-malignant. The doctor called Marcus on a Monday morning, and Marcus stood in his kitchen with Sandra beside him, and listened, and then hung up, and turned to her and said simply, "It's okay." And Sandra, who had been holding herself together for 10 days with the particular controlled tension of a person who is being strong for someone else, and knows it and does it anyway, put her face in her hands and cried with relief. The unstoppable kind. The kind that has been waiting in a pressurized container and releases all at once when the pressure is finally lifted. Marcus held her for a long time. Then he called Keanu. Keanu picked up on the second ring. Marcus said, "It's okay." And Keanu said, "I knew it would be." He didn't know that. He had not known that. He had sat with the not knowing for 10 days, the same way Marcus had sat with it, carrying it, holding it, not making it anyone else's problem. But he said, "I knew it would be the way you say certain things to people you love, when the news is good and the relief is so complete that retroactive certainty feels like the truest available response." Marcus laughed. It was the full laugh, unguarded and real, the laugh of a man whose body had just remembered how to be at ease. "You're a terrible liar," Marcus said. "I know," Keanu said, "but it worked out." On Marcus Hale's wrist, in the ordinary morning light of his kitchen in Los Angeles, the Patek Philippe Calatrava kept its perfect time. It would keep it for decades. It would keep it through doctor's appointments and film sets and grandchildren. That part was still ahead. And ordinary Tuesdays and extraordinary ones. Through all the hours of a life that had been given back to itself on a Monday morning phone call. The 4 words on the back of it would not tarnish. They were the right words. They had always been the right words. And the man who chose them had known that standing in a store on Rodeo Drive, sitting on a bench that wasn't meant for him, waiting for someone to see him, carrying a love he intended to deliver regardless of how long it took. 3 weeks after Keanu Reeves walked out of Arlington and Cole with a dark bag and a borrowed jacket and 43 minutes of quiet dignity behind him, Corinne Tassard made a list. Not a professional list. Not a management action plan or a strategic initiative document or anything that would eventually live in a folder on her office desk with a labeled tab. A personal list, written on the back of an envelope she found in her kitchen drawer on a Sunday evening, with a glass of wine going warm beside her, and the apartment quiet, in the particular way that a home is quiet, when it is only ever occupied by one person, and that person has made a kind of peace with that. The list had 2 items on it. The first item was professional. The second was personal. She wrote them in the order they came to her, which turned out to be the order of their importance in reverse. The first item said, "Fix the floor." The second item said, "Call Papa more." She looked at the list for a moment. She considered adding a third item. She decided against it. 2 things done well were worth more than 6 things done adequately, and she had learned this from a man who had spent 31 years doing one thing with complete and total devotion, and had never once suggested that the scope of a life needed to be broad to be full. She folded the envelope in half and put it under the fruit bowl where she would see it every morning. Then she picked up her phone and called Emma. The professional item first, because it is the one that affected more people. Corinne spent the better part of April rebuilding the floor training program at Arlington & Cole from its foundation. Not the official training manual, which covered product knowledge and transaction procedures and the mechanics of the sale, but the unwritten training. The training that happened in sideways glances and modeled behaviors, and the invisible architecture of which customers received what quality of attention and why. She brought in a consultant named Vera Osei, 44 years old, a specialist in luxury retail culture and consumer experience, who had spent 15 years studying the gap between what high-end stores believed they were doing and what they were actually doing. Vera had a particular gift for making people see systems they had been swimming in so long they had stopped registering as systems. Vera spent 2 days on the floor of Arlington & Cole. She watched. She made notes. She did not share her notes as she made them. On the 3rd day, she sat down with Corinne and said, with the directness of someone who has had this conversation many times and has learned that directness serves everyone better than diplomatic cushioning. Your store is doing what every store like this does. You have built a culture that rewards speed of assessment over quality of attention. Your staff are not bad people. They are people who have been optimized for the wrong thing. Corinne nodded. What do we change? She asked. Vera looked at her notepad. Everything that tells your staff the surface is more real than the person, which is most of it. They started with the greeting protocol. The existing culture, unwritten, self-replicating, invisible to the people inside it, rewarded associates who spent the first 4 seconds of a customer encounter making an assessment and routing accordingly. The fastest assessors, the ones who could quickly distinguish a qualified customer from a browser, had been subtly elevated through the commission structure and through the modeled admiration of senior staff. Speed of sorting had become conflated with competence. Vera replaced this with a simple principle, which she wrote on a card and had laminated and placed at every associate station. Approach first. Assess never. Not a long instruction. Not a list of prohibited behaviors. Just the inversion of the existing reflex. Made physical. Made present. Placed where eyes would fall on it multiple times a day, until the body had absorbed it before the mind had consciously agreed to. Then they worked on the commission structure, which was the deeper architecture. Commission systems in luxury retail often function as invisible instructors, teaching staff, through the consistent reward of certain behaviors and the consistent non-reward of others, what a customer is worth before the customer has done anything. Corinne restructured the evaluation metrics to include customer satisfaction scores weighted equally with sale completion rates. She introduced peer recognition for service quality, not sales volume, but the quality of attention given regardless of outcome. A customer who was helped genuinely and left without purchasing was, in this new accounting, as valuable an interaction as a completed sale. These changes were not announced dramatically. There was no all-hands meeting, no memo describing a formative incident. Corinne had made a promise, not on my account, and she kept it in every direction it applied, including the direction that would have turned the morning of March 14th into a cautionary tale delivered in a conference room. Instead, the changes arrived as policy, as restructured incentives, as Vera's laminated card at each station, as a new section of the onboarding training that began not with product knowledge but with a single question asked of every new associate on their first day. Tell me about a time when someone saw you when you didn't expect to be seen. What did it feel like? Corinne wrote that question herself. She wrote it on a Wednesday evening in her office, with the store empty and the chandelier still lit above the floor, and the display cases dark, and the velvet pads holding their watches, the way hands hold things they have been trusted with. She thought about a man sitting on a bench. She thought about blue thread. She thought about 4 words she had promised herself she would not read, and had read anyway, and would not forget. She wrote the question down. Brianna Loft stayed. This is worth noting because it was not the inevitable outcome, and Corinne had not known, in the weeks following the morning of March 14th, which direction Brianna would go, whether the weight of what she had done would compound into defensiveness, into the self-protective revision of memory that people sometimes undertake when the alternative is sitting with something uncomfortable for as long as it takes to understand it, or whether it would become something else. It became something else. Brianna was 26 years old, and she was, as Keanu had said in a different context about people in general, a good person, operating inside a system that had asked her to be otherwise. Once the system changed, once the architecture of the floor stopped rewarding the behavior she had exhibited and started rewarding something different, Brianna changed with it, the way people change when the structure around them finally aligns with the better version of themselves that was there all along, waiting for the conditions that would make it possible. She became, within 6 months, one of the best floor associates Corinne had ever managed. Not because she had met a famous person and been appropriately humbled. That framing, the celebrity encounter as moral lesson, was too simple and too convenient, and missed the actual thing that had happened. What had happened was that Brianna had looked at a man who had been made to wait, who had asked for help twice with genuine courtesy, who had been assessed and dismissed and made invisible, and she had recognized, not because of who he turned out to be but because of how he had behaved throughout, that she had been wrong in a way that mattered. The quality of his dignity had taught her something about the cost of dismissing it. She thought about that, in the months that followed, more than she thought about his name, or his films, or the $44,000 watch. She thought about the fact that he had said, "I'm sorry to bother you," and meant it. That he had sat on the bench without making anyone manage his discomfort. That he had looked at her, on his way out, with the ordinary glance of someone who sees a person rather than through them. She had wanted to be the kind of person who earned that glance. She worked at it. It turned out to be the most useful professional development she had ever done, and it cost nothing and appeared on no training record. Derek Soames left the store in July, not because Corinne asked him to. He left because he was offered a position at a larger retailer in West Hollywood with a higher base salary, and he took it, which was a reasonable decision made for reasonable reasons. And Corinne wished him well with the full and uncomplicated sincerity of a manager who understood that people moving toward better opportunities was not a reflection on the place they were moving from. She hired someone new in August, a young man named Thomas Arrieta, 24 years old, recently graduated, with no luxury retail experience and a quality of attention in conversation that Corinne recognized within the first 4 minutes of his interview as something that could not be trained into a person, only developed in a person who already had its roots. She hired him on the basis of how he listened. His first day, she walked him to his station and pointed to Vera's laminated card. She read it aloud. "Approach first, assess never." And then she told him that if he wanted to understand what those 4 words meant in practice, the best explanation she had was a story. She told him about March 14th. She did not use any names. She did not describe the customer in any way that would make him identifiable. She described only the man, the jacket, the boots, the bench, the 43 minutes, the Calatrava, and the conversation at the end, the part where the man said, "That just makes the same mistake from a different direction." Thomas listened the way he listened to everything, without the performance of listening, just the real thing. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What was the watch for?" Corinne looked at him. "A friend," she said. "A man who spent his whole career doing important work that no one filmed. He was retiring." Thomas nodded slowly. "And the friend, is he okay?" Corinne paused. She did not know the answer to this. She had no way of knowing. The customer had not come back. She had no contact. The morning of March 14th was complete and sealed in her memory with no subsequent chapter that she had been given access to. "I believe so," she said. "I think the watch found its way to the right wrist." Thomas looked at the empty display case in front of him. His display case now, the one he would be responsible for, the one that held its watches on velvet mounts under calibrated light, and waited for the stories that would come through the door, with the people who needed them. "I'd want to know," he said, "if I'd helped with something like that. I'd want to know it turned out okay." Corinne looked at him for a moment. "You will," she said. "Not always, but sometimes. And when you do, it's enough." She left him to his display case and walked back toward her office and paused at the door, the frosted glass door with the brushed metal handle and no label, and looked out at the floor. The chandelier, the carpet the color of slate, the cases running along both walls with their lit interiors, the bench against the wall near the first display case, upholstered and unoccupied, waiting with the patient blankness of furniture for whoever would need it next. She looked at the bench for a moment. She thought about Andre. She thought about Emma. She thought about the ceramic dish on her bedroom dresser with the faded blue threads wound together in it, between blue and gray now, the color of something that used to be brighter and had been worn toward something quieter by the friction of years of being kept close. She thought about the fact that she had called her father that Tuesday, and the following Sunday, and the Sunday after that, and that she had not missed a Sunday since, and that the calls had been, on average, 20 minutes longer than they used to be, and that Andre answered every one of them with the same slight surprise, the same warmth, the same quality of a man receiving a small, unexpected gift, and being more pleased for not having prepared for it. She thought about how small the things were that turned out to matter. A bench, a bracelet, a question asked in the right direction, a door opened when it should have been opened 43 minutes earlier, a phone call made on a Tuesday afternoon instead of waiting for Sunday. She pushed open the door. She stepped into her office. She sat down at her desk. She pulled the transaction folder for March 14th from the filing drawer, where it lived in its proper place among the other completed transactions of that day. Unremarkable in its physical form, a standard manila folder with a reference number, indistinguishable from the folders on either side of it. She opened it. Inside, the standard documents. The authentication certificate, the warranty registration, the purchase receipt, the engraving order form, filled out in a clear, unshowy hand, the 4 words in their designated space. She had not looked at the 4 words again since the morning they were written. She looked at them now. She sat with them for a moment. She closed the folder. She put it back in the drawer. She picked up her phone and opened her contacts and found the number she had added to her phone 2 weeks after March 14th. Not because she expected to use it, but because having it felt like the right completion of something. The proper closing of a circle that had opened on the morning a man in a gray jacket walked through her door and waited for someone to see him, and eventually, imperfectly, was seen. The contact was listed simply as, "Andre, Papa, call more." She had added the last 2 words herself, as a reminder in the form of a gentle instruction she was giving to the version of herself who might forget. She did not call him now. She had called on Sunday. She would call again on Sunday. The discipline of more often did not require every moment, just more moments than before, which was a threshold she was clearing consistently, and intended to keep clearing. She set the phone down. She looked at the fruit bowl from across the kitchen in her memory. The apartment, Sunday evening, the list on the envelope, fix the floor, call Papa more. And she registered, with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has done what they said they would do, that both items had been addressed. The floor was being fixed. The calls were more. It was not everything. It was not a transformation complete and total and arrived at cleanly from a single morning in March. It was the beginning of a direction, which is all that any real change ever is at first. A direction, chosen deliberately, moved toward one day and then another. The accumulation of small, consistent motion toward something better than what came before. Outside on Rodeo Drive, Beverly Hills conducted its ordinary business. Tourists photographed the street signs. Cars moved slowly through the regulated traffic of a neighborhood designed, at every level, to communicate abundance. Store windows displayed their objects in the particular posture of things that believed themselves to be worth looking at. Inside Arlington and Cole, Thomas Arrieta stood at his display case and watched the door. When it opened, he walked toward it, every time. Without assessment, without the 4-second calculation, without the routing mechanism that sorts human beings into worthy and unworthy before they have said a single word or revealed a single thing about who they are and what they are carrying and why they came in. He walked toward the door because someone had told him a story about a bench and a man in a gray jacket and a watch for a friend. And the story had done what the best stories always do. Not told him what to think, but shown him what it felt like to be on the other side of a closed door, and let that feeling do its own convincing. He walked toward the door. Every time. That was enough. That was, in the end, the whole of it.